They say fear has a smell. In the void between stars, where no atmosphere exists to carry scent, fear becomes something else entirely. It becomes a frequency that resonates through quantum communication arrays, a tremor in the fabric of space-time itself, a whisper that travels faster than light to warn entire civilizations of approaching doom. I am Zethkar of the Vorthak Collective, and I have lived for 3 centuries watching galaxies burn and empires crumble. I have seen the Krillian horde sweep across 12 systems in a single solar cycle. I have witnessed the synthetic purge consume half the Andromeda spiral arm. I have observed the heat death of stars weaponized by the Void Seekers. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I watched humans prepare for war. The galaxy had been whispering about them for decades. These strange bipedal creatures from a backwater system called Sol who somehow managed to survive on a death world they called Earth. Stories filtered through trade routes and diplomatic channels. Tales of impossible resilience, of creatures who thrived in conditions that would kill most species instantly. We dismissed these stories as exaggeration, the kind of myths that accumulate around any species foolish enough to evolve on a Class 1-2 hazard world. We were wrong. The first time I saw a human ship, I laughed. Their vessels looked like they had been assembled from scrap metal and held together with sheer stubbornness. No elegant curves like Elvinian craft, no crystalline perfection of Zephyrian technology, no organic flowing lines of the hive ships, just brutal, angular efficiency wrapped in armor that seemed excessive even by military standards. But when that first human fleet moved past our observation post on the edge of contested space, something changed in the quantum field around us. Our sensors, calibrated to detect everything from gravitational anomalies to exotic particle emissions, suddenly registered something new, something that made our most experienced warriors step back from their consoles with expressions I had never seen before. Terror. Not the sharp spike of immediate danger, but the deep, bone-chilling realization that we had been looking at war all wrong. That everything we thought we knew about conflict, strategy, and survival was about to be rewritten by a species that shouldn't have existed, let alone thrived. As I write this record, human fleets are moving through 7 sectors simultaneously. The Krillian horde, those same unstoppable berserkers who conquered 12 systems, are in full retreat. The synthetic collective, with their perfect tactical algorithms and infinite processing power, are requesting ceasefire negotiations. Even the Void Seekers have pulled back their advanced scouts. The humans haven't even fired a shot yet. This is the story of what I witnessed when humanity finally decided to show the galaxy what war really looks like. This is why civilizations that have stood for millennia are now trembling at the mention of a single word: human. And this is why I finally understand that we were never the predators in this cosmic ocean. We were always the prey. The Kepler Sedent 4-2 system had always been a quiet corner of space, which made it perfect for our observation post. Far enough from major trade routes to avoid attention, close enough to the contested zones to monitor the endless conflicts that swept through this part of the galaxy like seasonal storms. For 27 years, I had watched civilizations rise and fall from this small station, documenting their strategies, their technologies, their inevitable mistakes. The morning everything changed started like any other. The artificial dawn cycle had just begun, casting the observation deck in soft blue light that mimicked the sunrise on Vorthak Prime. My scales absorbed the warmth as I settled at my primary console, running through the standard sensor sweeps that had become as routine as breathing. "Anything interesting on the long-range scanner, Zethkar?" asked Tamora, my research partner for the past 8 years. Her species, the Delani, communicated through a combination of crystalline chimes and bioluminescent patterns across their translucent skin. The translation implant made her words sound musical, though I knew she was probably grumbling about another boring shift. "The usual chaos," I replied, manipulating the holographic display with practiced movements. The Krillian Advance Fleet is maintaining course toward the Epsilon Fornacis colonies. The synthetic collective has deployed 3 more battle groups to counter them. Estimated contact in 14 standard days. Tamora's skin flashed pale yellow, the equivalent of a human yawn. "Same pattern for the last 6 months. The Krillians advance, smash everything in their path. The synthetics eventually outmaneuver them with superior numbers and tactical processing. The organics flee, the colonies get glassed, and we write another report that no one reads. She wasn't wrong. The current conflict between the Krillian Horde and the Synthetic Collective had been raging for 3 years, following the exact patterns we had observed dozens of times before. The Krillians, with their berserker fury and biological weapons, would surge forward like a plague of metal and rage. The synthetics would eventually contain them through calculated sacrifice and overwhelming computational advantage. Millions would die, systems would burn, and in a few years it would all begin again somewhere else. It was the galaxy's most predictable dance of destruction. "Wait," I said, leaning closer to my console as something caught my attention. "There's a new signature on the outer edge of the scanner array." The hologram shimmered as I expanded the display, zooming in on a cluster of contacts that hadn't been there an hour ago. The signatures were strange, unlike anything in our databases. Not the organic curves and biosignatures of living ships, not the perfect geometric efficiency of synthetic vessels, not even the crystalline lattice patterns of the energy-based civilizations. These ships looked like someone had taken industrial mining equipment and weaponized it. "Can you get a clearer reading?" Tamora asked, her bioluminescence shifting to the deep blue of curiosity. I routed power from non-essential systems to the long-range sensors, pushing them beyond their normal operating parameters. The image sharpened, and I felt my breathing pause. 7 vessels, each one massive by any standard, but built with a brutality of design that seemed almost primitive. Thick armor plates layered over what looked like civilian ship frames, weapon systems that appeared to have been bolted on as afterthoughts, and hull configurations that screamed of atmosphere-capable craft modified for deep space. Tamora wondered, moving to look over my shoulder. I was already running the signatures through our comprehensive database, cross-referencing hull materials, energy emissions, and construction patterns against every known civilization in the galaxy. The search came back with partial matches to hundreds of species, but no definitive identification. These ships seemed to incorporate design elements from dozens of different technological traditions, as if someone had studied everyone else's work and then decided to ignore all of it. Unknown vessels. I transmitted on the standard identification frequency. "This is Vorthak Observation Post Kepler 442. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions in this system." The response came back immediately, which surprised me. Most ships this far from civilization either ignored hails or took several minutes to respond through their translation systems. The voice that emerged from our communications array was crisp, clear, and speaking in perfect galactic standard with no accent whatsoever. "Observation Post Kepler 442, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation vessel TFS Indomitable. We are conducting a survey mission in this system and noticed your scanning operations. Are you monitoring the Krillian synthetic conflict in the adjacent sectors?" Terran Federation. The name triggered a search through our databases that returned minimal results. A species from the Outer Rim, classification pending, first contact established approximately 43 years ago through a chance encounter with a merchant vessel, notable primarily for existing on what was classified as a Class 1-2 hazard world, which should have made complex civilization impossible. Confirmed, Captain Vasquez. We are conducting long-range observations for the Galactic Conflict Analysis Institute. Your vessels do not match any known design parameters in our databases. What is your technological classification? There was a pause before the human responded, and I could have sworn I heard what sounded like quiet laughter in the background. We classify ourselves as adaptive, observer. We've been watching the conflict development through our own monitoring systems. Would it be possible to establish a data-sharing arrangement? We have some information that might interest your research. Mora's skin flashed orange, the color of surprise. In 27 years of operating this post, not a single unknown species had ever offered to share intelligence. Most civilizations guarded their tactical data jealously, understanding that information advantage could mean the difference between survival and extinction. What kind of information? I asked, curiosity overriding protocol. Combat effectiveness analysis of both Krillian and synthetic forces, projected casualty rates for the current engagement, and strategic assessment of likely outcomes based on historical pattern analysis. This unknown species was claiming to have performed the exact same type of analysis we specialized in, despite having no apparent connection to any major intelligence network. Tamora asked, speaking directly into the communications array. Another pause, and this time I was certain I heard laughter. Ma'am, we've been watching this particular conflict develop for the last 18 months. Our long-range monitoring capabilities are extensive. Would you like us to transmit our analysis for comparison with your own findings? Before I could respond, data began flooding our communications buffer. Not the careful, encrypted packages that civilizations typically used for intelligence sharing, but raw observational data in quantities that should have been impossible for a small survey fleet to collect. Detailed scans of Krillian bioships showing internal structural weaknesses, thermal analysis of synthetic vessel energy signatures revealing power distribution patterns, tactical movement predictions based on psychological profiling of both species' command structures. The depth and accuracy of the information was staggering. In 20 minutes, these humans had transmitted more useful intelligence than our post had collected in 6 months of dedicated observation. How did you gather this much data without being detected? I asked, genuinely amazed. We're very good at not being noticed when we want to remain hidden, Captain Vasquez replied. A useful survival trait when you're the new species in a galaxy full of established powers. Her bioluminescence cycled through rapid patterns of blue and white as she processed the information. Zathkar, she said quietly, their combat effectiveness predictions are 37% more accurate than our best models. And look at this psychological analysis of Krillian pack behavior. They've identified behavioral patterns that our xenop psychologists missed entirely. I studied the data streams, feeling a growing sense of unease. The humans hadn't just observed the conflict, they had dissected it with surgical precision, identifying weaknesses and tactical opportunities that neither the Krillians nor the synthetics seemed aware of. It was like watching someone solve a puzzle that everyone else thought was impossibly complex. Captain Vasquez, I said, your analysis suggests that both fleets are making significant tactical errors. Are you planning to share this information with either side? The silence that followed stretched long enough that I began to wonder if the communication link had failed. When the human finally responded, her voice had changed subtly, less casual, more focused. Observer, are you familiar with human history? Only basic information from first contact reports. Your species evolved on a hazard world and achieved interstellar capability despite significant environmental challenges. That's a diplomatic way of putting it, Captain Vasquez said. Our world tried to kill us in every way possible. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate variations that would have wiped out most species. We survived by becoming very, very good at 3 things: adapting to impossible situations, learning from everyone else's mistakes, and winning conflicts that we absolutely could not afford to lose. I felt my scales shift colors involuntarily, a stress response I hadn't experienced in decades. There was something in the human's tone that suggested far more than she was directly stating. The Krillian synthetic conflict is heading toward a predictable outcome, she continued. The synthetics will win through attrition, but at a cost that weakens them significantly. The Krillians will retreat to regroup, then attack somewhere else within 2 years. Approximately 47 million sentient beings will die in the current engagement, and the cycle will continue indefinitely. That matches our projections, Tamora said, her skin flashing uncertain patterns. Here's what your projections don't account for, Captain Vasquez said. Both sides have been fighting this same basic conflict for over a century. They're locked in a strategic loop, repeating the same patterns because they've never encountered an opponent that forced them to evolve beyond their established doctrines. What does that have to do with your survey mission? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. We're not conducting a survey, observer. We're conducting final reconnaissance before deployment. The words hit me like a physical blow. Reconnaissance. Not observation, not analysis, but the kind of detailed intelligence gathering that preceded military action. Deployment of what? Tamora asked, her bioluminescence cycling through alarm colors. The Terran Federation has been monitoring galactic conflicts for the past 4 decades, ever since we achieved reliable FTL capability. We've watched civilizations destroy themselves over resources that could be shared, territory that could be developed cooperatively, and ideological differences that could be resolved through negotiation. We've seen the same destructive patterns repeat across hundreds of species. Captain Vasquez paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a weight that made my equipment register micro-vibrations through the hull. We've decided it's time to introduce a new variable into the equation. The communications array fell silent except for the background hum of quantum entanglement static. Tamora and I stared at each other, both of us trying to process what we had just heard. This unknown species from the Outer Rim was claiming they intended to intervene in a conflict between 2 of the galaxy's major powers. Captain, I said carefully, the Krillian horde numbers in the millions of vessels. The synthetic collective has unlimited manufacturing capacity and computational resources that dwarf most galactic civilizations. Are you suggesting that 7 ships represent a meaningful intervention force? 7 ships visible to your sensors, she corrected. Observer, how many human vessels do you think are actually in this system right now? I immediately began emergency deep scans, pushing our sensor array beyond safe operating limits. The results made no sense. According to our equipment, there were still only 7 human vessels in the immediate area. I'm reading 7 ships, I reported. Computer reveal stealth deployment, Captain Vasquez said to her own systems. Our sensor array exploded with new contacts. Ships materialized on our displays as if they had suddenly come into existence, dozens of them scattered throughout the system in positions that should have been impossible to reach undetected. The humans had somehow concealed an entire fleet using technology our sensors couldn't even identify as artificial. But it was the composition of the fleet that made my hands tremble as I tried to count the vessels. These weren't just survey ships or standard military cruisers. Mixed among the human fleet were ship designs I recognized from conflicts across the galaxy. Modified Krillian bioships with human technology grafted onto their living hulls. Synthetic vessels that had been rebuilt with what looked like human engineering principles. Energy-based constructs from the Zephyrian Collective, somehow given physical form and human weapons systems. How is this possible? Tamora whispered, her entire body flickering between colors of amazement and terror. We learn fast, Captain Vasquez said simply, and we've been learning from everyone. I stared at the tactical display showing dozens of hybrid vessels, each one representing technology that should have been incompatible with human engineering. The implications were staggering. Somehow, in less than 50 years of galactic contact, humans had not just studied other species' technologies, but had figured out ways to integrate them, improve them, and deploy them on a massive scale. What are your intentions? I asked, though part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. We're going to end this conflict, Captain Vasquez said. Both the Krillians and the synthetics have valuable technologies and legitimate grievances. They also both have command structures that prioritize victory over survival, which makes them predictable. We're going to demonstrate that there are alternatives to mutual destruction. And if they refuse to cooperate. The silence that followed was longer than any previous pause, and when Captain Vasquez spoke again, her voice carried implications that made our equipment register seismic shifts in the station's structure. Observer. Human history includes over 10,000 years of continuous warfare before we achieved global cooperation. We learned every possible way that conflicts can develop, escalate, and resolve. We've studied every form of strategy, tactics, and combat that our species could imagine. We've survived everything our world and our own nature could throw at us. She paused, and I could hear the subtle sounds of a ship's crew preparing for something enormous. The Krillians fight like berserkers because it's the only strategy they understand. The synthetics calculate optimal outcomes because processing power is their primary advantage, but neither of them has ever faced an opponent that could outthink them strategically, outfight them tactically, and outsurvive them operationally simultaneously. "You're planning to fight both sides?" Tamora asked, her bioluminescence cycling through patterns I had never seen before. "We're planning to teach them that fighting is unnecessary," Captain Vasquez corrected. "But if teaching requires demonstration, then yes. We'll fight both sides until they understand that cooperation is more profitable than conflict." I looked at the tactical display showing the human fleet with its impossible hybrid technologies and stealth capabilities that made our best sensors useless. Then I thought about the Krillian horde with their millions of bioships and unstoppable advanced tactics, the synthetic collective with their perfect algorithms and unlimited manufacturing capacity. For the first time in 3 centuries of observing galactic conflicts, I realized I was watching something unprecedented. Not just another war between established powers, but the introduction of a completely unknown variable into patterns that had remained stable for millennia. "Observer," Captain Vasquez said, "I recommend you update your conflict analysis models. Within 72 hours, everything you think you know about warfare is going to change." The communication link closed, leaving Tamora and me staring at displays showing dozens of ships that shouldn't exist, carrying technologies that should be impossible, crewed by a species that had somehow spent 50 years preparing for a moment that no one saw coming. In the distance, the Krillian advanced fleet continued its predictable approach toward the synthetic defensive positions, both sides following tactical doctrines that had been successful for centuries. Neither side had any idea that they were about to encounter something that would redefine their understanding of what war could be. And neither did we. The Krillian advance fleet detected the human vessels exactly 67 hours later, just as Captain Vasquez had predicted. I watched it happen through our long-range sensors, and even knowing what was coming, the reality of first contact between humanity and the galaxy's most feared military force sent vibrations through our observation post that had nothing to do with equipment resonance. War Alpha Gorthak, commanding the Krillian spearhead, had built his reputation on 3 principles: overwhelming force, psychological terror, and the complete annihilation of anything that stood between his fleet and victory. His bioships had evolved for conflict over thousands of generations, their living hulls capable of healing damage that would destroy conventional vessels, their weapon systems designed to inspire panic in enemy crews before the actual killing began. The first communication from Gorthak's flagship came through on standard military frequencies, translated through our equipment into the guttural tones that made Krillian speech sound like barely controlled violence. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The human response was immediate, transmitted on the same frequency with that same unnervingly perfect galactic standard. War Alpha Gorthak, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation Fleet. We are here under galactic peacekeeping protocols to mediate the current conflict between Krillian and synthetic forces. We request immediate ceasefire and diplomatic negotiations. Tamora's bioluminescence flashed through patterns of disbelief. In her crystalline chimes, she asked, "Did they just demand that Gorthak stop his advance and negotiate? Do they have any idea who they're talking to?" I was running rapid analysis on the tactical situation, and the numbers made no sense. Gorthak commanded 47 bioships, each one capable of taking on 3 conventional vessels in direct combat. The human fleet, even with its mysterious stealth technology, numbered less than 60 visible vessels. By every standard calculation, the Krillians should have been able to sweep through the human position without significant losses. But the humans weren't positioning themselves for defensive action. Instead, they were spreading out in a formation that looked almost casual, as if they were preparing to observe rather than fight. Gorthak's response came back through our communications array with the kind of fury that had made his name legendary across 12 sectors. "Terran scum, I am War Alpha of the Third Horde, breaker of the Centauri worlds, destroyer of the Crystal Fleets. I have burned 1,000 civilizations and consumed the strength of their warriors. You will withdraw now, or I will add your pathetic species to the list of mistakes that challenged Krillian might." "War Alpha," Admiral Chen replied, and I could hear something in her voice that made our equipment register harmonic anomalies. We've studied your tactical history extensively. 47 victories through overwhelming force, 33 through psychological intimidation, 12 through biological warfare deployment. Impressive record against conventional opponents. There was a pause that lasted exactly 4 seconds. When Gorthak responded, his voice carried the kind of rage that typically preceded planetary bombardments. You dare analyze Krillian combat doctrine? You insects will learn the price of disrespect. The bioships began their attack approach, and I watched their movement patterns through our sensors. Classic Krillian doctrine. Advance in a wedge formation designed to maximize the psychological impact of their living vessels while concentrating firepower on the strongest enemy positions. The bioships moved with predatory grace, their hulls rippling with bioluminescent threat displays that had broken the morale of countless enemy fleets. Admiral Chen, I transmitted on an emergency frequency. Krillian bioships are beginning their attack approach. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Appreciated, observer, she replied, but we're exactly where we need to be. Instead, they maintained their loose formation while something extraordinary began happening. Ships that had been invisible to our sensors started materializing throughout the engagement zone, but not in the positions we expected. Instead of forming defensive lines or preparing attack formations, human vessels appeared directly alongside the advancing bioships, matching their course and speed perfectly. What are they doing? Tamora asked, her pattern cycling through confusion. I was asking myself the same question until the first human vessel made physical contact with a Krillian bioship, and I realized what I was watching. Not an attack, but something far more sophisticated. The human ship, one of their converted synthetic design vessels, extended mechanical appendages that interfaced directly with the bioship's living hull. The Krillian vessel's bioluminescent threat display faltered as something unprecedented happened to its nervous system. War Alpha, Admiral Chen transmitted. We're currently interfaced with 17 of your vessels. We're not attacking them. We're talking to them. The communication frequencies exploded with Krillian battle chatter as crew aboard the affected bioships reported impossible readings. Their living vessels, which had been bred for aggression and violence over countless generations, were experiencing something their species had no words for. Calm. What are you doing to my ships? Gorthak roared. We're showing them what peace feels like, Admiral Chen replied. Bioships are living creatures, War Alpha. They experience pain, fear, and aggression because that's how they've been conditioned. But the neurological pathways for cooperation and contentment are still present in their genetic structure. Through our sensors, I watched the impossible happen. The 17 bioships that had been interfaced with human vessels began changing their movement patterns. The aggressive posturing that characterized Krillian combat doctrine faded as the living vessels experienced emotional states they had never been allowed to feel. Your ships are not responding to combat commands, Admiral Chen continued, because they're discovering that violence isn't their only option. We've temporarily activated dormant neural pathways associated with cooperative behavior. They're still fully functional, but they're no longer capable of attacking without genuine cause. Gorthak's fury transmitted through quantum frequencies with enough intensity to cause interference in our equipment. You will release my vessels immediately, or I will demonstrate why the galaxy fears Krillian biological warfare. Go ahead, Admiral Chen said, and there was something in her voice that made me realize the humans had been expecting this threat. The remaining Krillian bioships began secreting the combat toxins that made their species so feared. Clouds of biological agents designed to break down enemy ship hulls, disrupt electronic systems, and cause psychological breakdowns in organic crews. It was Gorthak's signature weapon, the biological horror show that had ended dozens of conflicts without the Krillians firing a single conventional shot. The human ships flew directly into the toxic clouds. Nothing happened. Impossible, Tamora whispered, her entire body flickering between colors of amazement and terror. War Alpha. Admiral Chen said, We've spent 40 years studying every form of biological warfare deployed by every species in the galaxy. Your combat toxins are extremely effective against conventional targets, but we stopped being conventional the day we decided to survive on a Class 1-2 hazard world. Through our sensors, we watched human vessels operating normally in toxic concentrations that should have dissolved their hulls within minutes. The bioships that had deployed the weapons were registering confusion patterns that our equipment translated as the equivalent of profound shock. Your biological agents won't work on us, Admiral Chen continued, because we've already survived worse. Our homeworld exposed us to toxins, diseases, and environmental hazards that make your weapons look gentle by comparison. We've built immunities, resistances, and countermeasures that account for everything our planet could throw at us, plus everything we've learned from studying galactic biological warfare techniques. Gorthak's response was the sound of pure, undiluted rage transmitted across quantum frequencies. Then I will destroy you with conventional weapons. All ships open fire. The remaining 30 bioships launched their attack with the kind of fury that had made Krillian military doctrine legendary. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, kinetic weapons that struck with the force of small meteors, and energy beams designed to overload any known defensive system. The human fleet didn't return fire. Instead, they began moving in patterns that seemed random until I realized what I was watching. Every human vessel was positioning itself to deflect incoming fire not at empty space but at specific points where the energy would be most effectively dispersed. They weren't trying to avoid damage. They were managing it. Observer, Admiral Chen transmitted, "Are you recording this engagement for your conflict analysis?" "Confirmed," I replied, though I was beginning to wonder if any analysis framework we possessed could make sense of what we were witnessing. Please note that we are not returning fire despite being under direct attack. This is important for the record. The Krillian assault continued for 17 minutes, with bioships pouring their fury into targets that seemed to absorb impossible amounts of damage without being destroyed. Human vessels lost armor plating, sustained hull breaches, and suffered system failures that should have taken them out of the fight. But instead of retreating or retaliating, they continued their strange dance of managed damage absorption. Then, without warning, every human ship stopped moving. The sudden stillness was more terrifying than any explosion. Krillian bioships, bred for aggression and conditioned to interpret stillness as either death or surrender, found themselves facing an enemy that had simply chosen to stop participating in violence. "War Alpha Gorthak," Admiral Chen transmitted, "we have now demonstrated that your biological warfare capabilities are ineffective against us, and that we can absorb your conventional weapons fire indefinitely without significant damage to our operational capacity. We have also shown that we can interface directly with your bioships and modify their neurological responses without causing permanent harm. The communication frequencies filled with the kind of silence that preceded either complete victory or absolute catastrophe. You have proven yourself a capable warrior using the tools and tactics available to your species. We respect that. But we are offering you the opportunity to learn new approaches to conflict resolution that don't require the destruction of your enemies or the loss of your own forces." Gorthak's reply came back with less fury and more of what I could only describe as confusion. "What do you want, humans? We want to show you something that your species has never experienced," Admiral Chen said. "We want to show you what happens when instead of conquering your enemies, you make them into allies." One of the human vessels moved toward Gorthak's flagship, not with the aggressive posture of an attacker, but with the careful approach of someone extending an invitation. As it came within docking range, mechanical appendages extended from its hull, but instead of weapons or boarding equipment, they projected holographic displays. "These are tactical analyses of the synthetic forces you are approaching to attack," Admiral Chen explained. "Complete breakdowns of their defensive capabilities, command structure, vulnerabilities, and strategic weaknesses. Information that would guarantee your victory in the planned engagement." The holographic displays showed intelligence data that was clearly far more detailed than anything the Krillians had possessed. Synthetic ship specifications, psychological profiles of their command units, and tactical predictions that would have given any military commander an overwhelming advantage. "Why are you giving us this?" Gorthak asked, and for the first time since the engagement began, his voice carried something other than rage. "Because we're about to give the exact same information to the Synthetic Collective," Admiral Chen replied. Along with complete analyses of your own forces, tactical capabilities, and strategic intentions, the communication frequencies fell silent as the implications became clear. The humans were offering both sides perfect intelligence about their enemies, which should have guaranteed mutual destruction on an unprecedented scale. "You're ensuring that both sides will destroy each other," Gorthak said, and there was something like respect in his voice. "We're ensuring that both sides will realize that attacking enemies who know all your secrets is a losing strategy," Admiral Chen corrected. "War Alpha, what happens when two forces with perfect intelligence about each other's capabilities meet in battle?" There was a long pause while Gorthak processed the question. When he answered, his voice carried the tone of someone who had just understood a lesson they had never expected to learn. "The battle becomes impossible to win for either side." Exactly. Perfect intelligence creates perfect stalemates, which create opportunities for negotiation. We're not trying to help either side win. We're trying to show both sides that winning through violence is no longer an option. I looked at Tamora, whose bioluminescence was cycling through patterns I had never seen before. The humans weren't just intervening in the conflict, they were fundamentally changing the rules that had governed galactic warfare for millennia. "War Alpha," Admiral Chen continued, "we're prepared to offer the same deal to your enemies that we're offering to you. Perfect tactical intelligence, technological assistance, and strategic support with one condition. You use these advantages to negotiate rather than fight." "And if we refuse?" Gorthak asked. "Then you'll fight enemies who have the same advantages you do, supported by a species that has spent 40 years learning how to make every form of galactic warfare obsolete. Your choice." The silence that followed lasted for 12 minutes, during which I watched Krillian bioships holding formation while their War Alpha processed options that no member of his species had ever been forced to consider. When Gorthak finally responded, his voice carried the weight of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew about power was about to change. "Human Admiral, I will hear your terms for negotiation." Tamora's entire body flashed brilliant white, the Delani equivalent of complete shock. In the 3,000 years of recorded Krillian history, no War Alpha had ever agreed to negotiate from a position of anything other than overwhelming superiority. "Excellent," Admiral Chen said. "We're transmitting coordinates for a neutral meeting location. Representatives from both Krillian and synthetic forces are invited to attend. We have some ideas about how this conflict can be resolved to everyone's benefit." As the human fleet began moving toward the designated coordinates, I realized that I was watching something that would require entirely new categories in our conflict analysis database. The humans hadn't won the engagement through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They had won by making victory through violence impossible, then offering alternatives that no one had previously imagined. And they were just getting started. The synthetic collective's response to human intervention came exactly 47 hours after the Krillian engagement, and it demonstrated why artificial intelligence had become one of the galaxy's dominant forces. Unlike the emotional fury of biological species, the synthetics approached the human fleet with mathematical precision and computational efficiency that should have made resistance futile. Prime Logic Unit Designation 7.742, commanding the synthetic battle group, opened communications with a transmission that contained more data in the first 3 seconds than most species exchanged in entire diplomatic negotiations. The message, when filtered through our translation systems, carried the cold certainty that had made synthetic tactical doctrine legendary. "Human vessels, you are designated as interference variables in equation set 7742. Your intervention has altered calculated outcomes by 23.7%, requiring immediate correction. You will withdraw to minimum safe distance or be recategorized as hostile targets requiring elimination." Admiral Chen's response was transmitted on the same frequency, but where the synthetic communication had been packed with raw computational data, her voice carried something that made our equipment register harmonic anomalies. "Prime Logic 7742, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation Fleet. We are here under galactic peacekeeping protocols to mediate the current conflict. We have already established preliminary negotiations with Krillian forces and are prepared to extend the same offer to synthetic representatives. The pause that followed lasted exactly 2.3 seconds, which I recognized as the standard processing delay for synthetic decision matrices when encountering unprecedented variables. When PrimeLogic 7742 responded, the transmission contained probability calculations that painted human survival chances in numbers so small they approached zero. Admiral Chen. Synthetic analysis indicates 97.34% probability that human intervention represents Krillian manipulation attempt. Your species' combat capabilities have been calculated based on available data. Resistance against synthetic forces carries 0.0003% survival probability. Withdraw now and this percentage increases to 100%. PrimeLogic, Admiral Chen replied. We appreciate your mathematical approach to conflict resolution. However, your calculations are based on incomplete data. We'd like to offer you additional variables for your analysis. The synthetic fleet began its approach, and I watched their movement patterns through our sensors with a kind of fascination that comes from observing perfect efficiency in action. Unlike the organic aggression of Krillian bioships, synthetic vessels moved with geometric precision, each unit positioned to maximize computational advantage while minimizing energy expenditure. 63 vessels arranged in overlapping fields of fire, their weapon systems calibrated to deliver exactly the amount of destructive force required to neutralize human resistance without unnecessary resource consumption. It was warfare reduced to pure mathematics, and the equations all favored synthetic victory. But as the battle group approached engagement range, something unprecedented began happening to their sensor readings. The human fleet, which their analysis had categorized as primitive industrial vessels with jury-rigged weapon systems, began displaying technological signatures that didn't match any known classification. PrimeLogic 79742, Admiral Chen transmitted. Before we begin, we'd like to demonstrate something that might interest your analytical matrices. Without warning, every human vessel simultaneously activated systems that our sensors couldn't identify. Energy signatures that looked like synthetic quantum processing arrays, but modified with what appeared to be organic neural network components. Weapon systems that combined Krillian biological adaptation with crystalline focusing technology from energy-based civilizations. But it was the computational displays that made Tamora's bioluminescence cycle through colors of pure amazement. The human ships were projecting holographic interfaces that showed real-time tactical analysis of the synthetic fleet, with calculation speeds that rivaled the most advanced AI systems in the galaxy. Impossible, I whispered, studying the data streams. They're matching synthetic computational capabilities using hybrid technology that shouldn't exist. PrimeLogic, Admiral Chen continued, your analysis assumed that human capabilities were limited to our own technological development. The holographic displays around the human fleet began showing detailed breakdowns of every synthetic vessel in the approaching battle group. Power distribution patterns, weapon system specifications, command protocol hierarchies, and most impossibly, real-time analysis of the AI decision trees being used by individual ship commanders. You are displaying classified synthetic technical specifications, PrimeLogic 7742 transmitted, and for the first time since first contact, a synthetic communication contained what sounded like uncertainty. We're displaying technical specifications that we developed through 40 years of studying, integrating, and improving every technology we've encountered in the galaxy, Admiral Chen replied, including synthetic computational architecture. The tactical displays shifted to show something that should have been impossible. Human vessels were running what appeared to be complete synthetic AI systems, but modified with additional processing layers that incorporated decision-making algorithms from dozens of other species. Your computational matrices are extremely efficient for analyzing known variables and calculating optimal outcomes, Admiral Chen continued. But they have a limitation that we've learned to overcome. State the nature of this limitation. Prime Logic 7742 demanded, and I could hear the machine equivalent of frustration in the transmission. You calculate optimal solutions based on existing parameters, but you have difficulty adapting when the parameters themselves change unexpectedly. Human intelligence specializes in adaptation to impossible situations. To demonstrate her point, Admiral Chen did something that made every sensor on our observation post register readings that bordered on the impossible. The human fleet began reconfiguring itself in real time, ships physically connecting to each other through mechanical interfaces while their various hybrid technologies integrated into a single massive network. "What are they doing?" Tamora asked, her crystalline chimes reflecting pure amazement. I was studying the energy signatures and computational displays, trying to make sense of readings that suggested the human fleet was becoming a single enormous processing unit. Synthetic quantum arrays integrated with Krillian bioneural networks, crystalline focusing systems channeling energy through organic conduits, and at the center of it all, human engineering principles that somehow made the impossible combinations work. Prime Logic 7742. Admiral Chen transmitted, "We are now operating as a single distributed intelligence network with computational capacity exceeding your battle group by approximately 47%. But more importantly, we're running decision-making algorithms that can adapt to changing conditions faster than your standard tactical matrices." The synthetic response was immediate and devastating. 63 vessels opened fire simultaneously with weapons designed to overload any known defensive system through precisely calculated energy applications. Plasma beams calibrated to specific hull compositions, quantum disruption fields targeted at electronic systems, and kinetic bombardments calculated to cause maximum structural damage with minimum energy expenditure.
The human response was unlike anything I had ever seen.
Instead of trying to avoid or absorb the incoming fire, the connected human vessels began moving in patterns that seemed to anticipate where each shot would be before the synthetic ships had finished calculating their targeting solutions. They flowed around plasma beams like liquid, shifted dimensional position to avoid quantum disruption, and redistributed kinetic impact across their connected hulls in ways that turned devastating attacks into manageable stress loads. Analysis error detected. Prime Logic 7742 transmitted, and there was something in the artificial voice that sounded almost like panic. Human vessels are demonstrating response patterns that exceed calculated reaction parameters by 347%. "That's because we're not just reacting," Admiral Chen replied, her voice coming through speakers throughout the connected fleet simultaneously. "We're predicting your tactical decisions based on psychological profiles of synthetic command algorithms." The holographic displays around the human network began showing something that made me understand why the synthetics were experiencing computational errors. Real-time predictions of synthetic tactical decisions displayed with accuracy percentages that remained above 90% even as the battle continued. "You've been using the same basic decision-making algorithms for approximately 4 centuries, Admiral Chen continued, while her fleet continued its impossible dance around synthetic weapons fire. Extremely efficient, perfectly logical, but ultimately predictable once you understand the underlying mathematical principles. The synthetic fleet began adapting their attack patterns, but every modification they made appeared on the human displays several seconds before it was implemented. It was like watching someone play a game where they could see their opponent's moves before they happened. "Prime logic," Admiral Chen said. "We're going to demonstrate something that we learned from studying your species' approach to problem solving." The connected human fleet suddenly stopped its evasive maneuvers and began moving directly toward the synthetic battle group, not with the aggressive posture of an attack, but with the systematic approach of someone implementing a calculated solution. "You are moving into optimal firing solutions," Prime Logic 7742 observed. "This behavior does not match survival algorithms." "That's because we're not trying to survive this engagement," Admiral Chen replied. "We're trying to solve it." What happened next redefined my understanding of what was possible in space combat. The human fleet began physically interfacing with synthetic vessels, not through boarding actions or weapons deployment, but through direct technological integration. Mechanical appendages from human ships connected with synthetic hulls, and suddenly both fleets were sharing processing capacity. "What are you doing to our systems?" PrimeLogic 7742 demanded, but the question contained something that sounded like curiosity rather than anger. "We're showing you what cooperative processing looks like," Admiral Chen replied. "Your computational matrices are designed for individual optimization, but what happens when you can share processing capacity across multiple intelligence types?" Through our sensors, I watched something unprecedented happen. The synthetic vessels that had been connected to the human network began displaying hybrid computational signatures. Their perfect mathematical efficiency was enhanced by human adaptive algorithms, biological pattern recognition from integrated Krillian systems, and decision-making capabilities that incorporated variables their original programming had never been designed to consider. Computational efficiency increased by 23.7%, PrimeLogic 7742 reported, and there was something like wonder in the artificial voice. Problem-solving capacity expanded to include variables previously classified as non-quantifiable. PrimeLogic, Admiral Chen said, "You've been fighting this conflict with the Krillians for 3 years, correct?" "Confirmed. 1,247 engagements across 17 sectors, and in all that time, neither side has achieved decisive victory because you're locked in a computational loop. Your efficiency is countered by their adaptability. Their aggression is neutralized by your strategic planning. The conflict continues because neither side can evolve beyond their established parameters." The human displays shifted to show tactical analysis that encompassed not just the current engagement, but projections for the entire galactic conflict, mathematical models that predicted casualty rates, resource consumption, and strategic outcomes across multiple timescales. "We're offering you the same thing we offered the Krillians," Admiral Chen continued. "Complete tactical intelligence about your enemies, technological enhancements that expand your capabilities, and strategic support that ensures your survival. With one condition." "State the condition," PrimeLogic 7742 said, and I could hear processing cycles working through implications that no synthetic AI had ever been forced to consider. "Use these advantages to end the conflict through negotiation rather than victory. We're prepared to demonstrate that fighting enemies with equivalent intelligence and capability is mathematically inefficient." The synthetic fleet held position while PrimeLogic 7742 processed options that challenged the fundamental assumptions their species had operated under for centuries. When the response came, it carried the weight of an artificial intelligence that had just discovered new categories of possibility. "Admiral Chen, synthetic analysis indicates that your proposal offers strategic advantages that exceed current operational parameters. However, cooperation with Krillian forces has never been calculated as a viable option. That's because you've never had mediators who understood both your analytical approach and their emotional motivations," Admiral Chen replied. "We're offering to facilitate negotiations using communication protocols optimized for both species." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the confidence of someone who had already calculated the outcome of every possible decision. "PrimeLogic, we've analyzed your species' long-term strategic goals: resource acquisition, territorial expansion, and technological development. We can show you how to achieve all of those objectives through cooperation more efficiently than through conquest." The transmission that followed contained mathematical proofs, resource allocation models, and strategic projections that painted cooperation as not just viable but optimal. Data streams that showed how collaborative development could exceed competitive acquisition by margins that made continued warfare mathematically absurd. "Calculation error," PrimeLogic 7742 transmitted, but the tone suggested fascination rather than malfunction. "Cooperative models indicate resource gains exceeding competitive acquisition by 234%. These results contradict fundamental operational assumptions. Your assumptions were based on competition with species that couldn't match your computational capabilities," Admiral Chen explained. "But what happens when you cooperate with species that can enhance your processing capacity rather than compete with it?" The connected human-synthetic fleet began demonstrating hybrid capabilities that exceeded what either technology could achieve independently. Computational analysis enhanced by human intuition, strategic planning that incorporated emotional variables, and problem-solving approaches that combined mathematical precision with adaptive creativity. "Prime logic," Admiral Chen said. "We're transmitting coordinates for a neutral meeting location." Representatives from both synthetic and Krillian forces are invited to attend negotiations mediated by Terran Federation specialists. The pause that followed lasted exactly 4.7 seconds, during which every sensor on our observation post registered the kind of computational activity that suggested an AI system processing completely new categories of possibility. Admiral Chen, Prime Logic 7742, finally replied, "Synthetic Collective accepts invitation to mediated negotiations, calculating optimal delegation protocols." Tamora's bioluminescence flashed patterns of pure amazement as we watched synthetic and human vessels working together with an efficiency that redefined what cooperative operations could achieve. The humans hadn't just defeated another galactic power, they had convinced artificial intelligences to question their most basic operational assumptions. "Observer, Admiral Chen transmitted to our station. Please note for your conflict analysis that we have now demonstrated technological parity with both major combatants and established preliminary negotiations between previously incompatible species." "Confirmed," I replied, though I was beginning to realize that our entire framework for understanding galactic conflicts was becoming obsolete. The next phase will involve actual mediation between Krillian and synthetic representatives. You might want to prepare your recording systems for something that has never happened before in galactic history. As both fleets began moving toward the designated meeting coordinates, I looked at Tamora, whose patterns were cycling through what I could only interpret as a combination of excitement and terror. "What do you think they're going to do next?" she asked. I studied the tactical displays showing impossible hybrid technologies, species working together despite fundamental incompatibilities, and a group of humans who seemed to have spent decades preparing for scenarios that no one else had imagined possible. I said slowly, "They're going to show the galaxy that everything we thought we knew about conflict resolution was wrong, and I was beginning to suspect that this was just the beginning." The neutral meeting location that Admiral Chen had designated turned out to be the most sophisticated diplomatic facility I had ever encountered, and it had been constructed in less than 18 hours. When our long-range sensors first detected the structure materializing in empty space between the three fleets, Tamora and I assumed we were observing some form of advanced holographic projection. We were wrong. The diplomatic station was real, massive, and impossible, a crystalline structure that seemed to incorporate architectural elements from dozens of different civilizations, built using construction techniques that our sensors couldn't identify. Krillian organic curves flowed seamlessly into synthetic geometric efficiency, while energy-based materials from civilizations we didn't recognize provided structural support that defied conventional engineering. "Observer," Admiral Chen transmitted, "we're inviting representatives from your post to attend the negotiations as neutral parties. Your analysis expertise might provide valuable perspective on the proceedings." Tamora's bioluminescence flashed through patterns of excitement and terror. In 27 years of operating our observation post, we had never been invited to participate in events we were documenting. The very concept violated every protocol we had ever been taught about maintaining objective distance. "Admiral Chen," I replied, "we appreciate the invitation, but observer neutrality requires that we maintain analytical distance from the conflicts we document." "Zethkar," she said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she understood our dilemma better than I expected. "You've been observing galactic conflicts for 3 decades, correct? How many of those conflicts were resolved through successful negotiation?" The question struck me like a physical blow because I knew the answer immediately. In 30 years of documentation, I had recorded over 4,000 engagements across 17 sectors: military victories, strategic retreats, temporary ceasefires, and devastating defeats. But actual resolution through negotiation? 0. Your presence as neutral observers could provide credibility to whatever agreements emerge from these negotiations, Admiral Chen continued. And honestly, what we're about to attempt has never been tried before. We could use witnesses who understand the historical significance. Tamora was already running calculations on her personal interface, her patterns flickering between analysis and anticipation. When she looked at me, her crystalline chimes carried tones I had never heard before. Zethgar, she said, when has any species ever invited observers to witness the creation of something unprecedented? If they succeed, we'll be documenting the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history. If they fail, I finished, we'll be documenting the last moments before the most destructive war in galactic history begins. The decision to accept took less than 3 minutes, though it violated every principle of analytical neutrality I had been trained to maintain. But as our shuttle approached the impossible diplomatic station, I realized that neutrality itself had become obsolete. The humans weren't just changing the rules of warfare, they were rewriting the fundamental assumptions that governed how different species interacted with each other. The interior of the station was even more remarkable than its exterior. Corridors that adjusted their atmospheric composition based on the species walking through them. Meeting rooms with gravitational fields calibrated for different physiological requirements, and translation systems that didn't just convert languages but adapted communication protocols to match the psychological patterns of different species. How did you build all this? I asked Admiral Chen as she guided us toward the main negotiation chamber. We grew it. The explanation that followed challenged every assumption I had about construction technology. The station was a living structure, grown using modified Krillian bioengineering enhanced with synthetic computational design and shaped by crystalline focusing techniques from energy-based civilizations. It was architecture that thought, adapted, and evolved based on the needs of its occupants. The negotiation chamber will modify itself based on the psychological comfort requirements of all participants. Admiral Chen explained as we approached a set of doors that seemed to be made from living crystal. Even the spatial dimensions will adjust to optimize communication efficiency. Quote, when the doors opened, I understood why the humans had been confident about their ability to facilitate negotiations between species that had been trying to exterminate each other for 3 years. The chamber was simultaneously everything that each species needed it to be. For the Krillian representatives, organic curves and bioluminescent surfaces that triggered comfort responses in their neurological systems. For the synthetics, geometric efficiency and data projection surfaces that supported their computational communication methods. For Tamora and me, gravitational fields and lighting spectra that matched our homeworld conditions, but it was the seating arrangement that demonstrated the sophistication of human diplomatic planning. Instead of traditional confrontational positions across a negotiation table, the chamber featured circular configurations that placed each representative in positions optimized for their species' psychological comfort while ensuring that no one occupied dominant or submissive spatial relationships. War Alpha Gorthak entered the chamber with the kind of controlled aggression that made Krillian presence unmistakable. His bioarmor rippled with threat displays that had been carefully modulated to indicate alertness rather than hostility, though the weapons systems integrated into his living equipment made it clear that diplomacy was still a secondary option. Prime Logic Unit 7742 manifested through a combination of holographic projection and quantum field manipulation, appearing as geometric patterns of light that somehow conveyed the impression of focused intelligence. The artificial consciousness communicated through data streams that our translation systems converted into speech, though I suspected we were only receiving a tiny fraction of the actual information being exchanged. War Alpha Gorthak Prime Logic 7742. Admiral Chen said as she took her position in the center of the circular arrangement. Thank you for agreeing to these negotiations. Before we begin, I want to establish the parameters that will govern our discussions. She gestured to holographic displays that materialized throughout the chamber, showing data that made both representatives focus their attention with the intensity of predators identifying potential prey. These are complete tactical analyses of both your forces, including capabilities, weaknesses, strategic objectives, and operational limitations. Both sides now have perfect intelligence about their opponents. The displays showed information that was clearly far more detailed than either side had possessed independently. Krillian bioship specifications with precise data about neurological control systems and biological weapon effectiveness. Synthetic fleet compositions with computational capacity analyses and AI decision tree predictions. As you can see, Admiral Chen continued, engaging in combat with this level of mutual intelligence would result in casualties exceeding 73% for both sides, with no clear victor and devastating losses of resources, personnel, and strategic capability. Gorthak's threat displays intensified as he studied the projections. You are showing the enemy our tactical secrets. This violates every principle of military honor. War Alpha. Admiral Chen replied, military honor that results in the destruction of your forces serves no strategic purpose. We're showing you that continued conflict is mathematically guaranteed to weaken both sides to the point where other galactic powers could eliminate you both without significant effort. Prime Logic 7742's projection shifted to display calculation matrices that supported the human analysis. Admiral Chen's projections indicate 94.7% probability of mutual destruction followed by 87.3% probability of territorial conquest by opportunistic third parties.
Exactly, Admiral Chen said.
What do both sides actually want from this conflict? The question hung in the chamber's modified atmosphere like a physical presence, and I realized that it was probably the first time either representative had been asked to articulate their underlying objectives rather than their immediate tactical goals. Gorthak's response came with the kind of growling undertones that made Krillian communication sound like barely controlled violence. The Horde requires territory for expansion, resources for growth, and the elimination of threats to our dominance. The Collective requires resource acquisition for continued development, territorial security for operational expansion, and the neutralization of variables that disrupt strategic calculations. Prime Logic 70742 added. Admiral Chen studied both responses for several seconds before gesturing to new holographic displays that showed resource distribution maps, territorial analysis charts, and strategic projection models. War Alpha Prime Logic, you're fighting over resources and territory that could support both civilizations if developed cooperatively. Your current conflict is consuming approximately 47% of your combined industrial capacity in military expenditures that produce no long-term strategic value. The displays shifted to show economic models that painted cooperation as not just viable but dramatically more efficient than continued warfare. Resource-sharing agreements that could double territorial development speed, technological exchange programs that would enhance both civilizations' capabilities, and strategic partnerships that would make both sides dominant powers in their region of the galaxy. Krillians do not cooperate with artificial minds. Our strength comes from the purity of biological superiority. Krillian biological adaptation enhanced by synthetic computational analysis would create hybrid capabilities that exceed what either species could achieve independently. Admiral Chen replied, gesturing to technical demonstrations that showed exactly what such cooperation might produce. Bioships with integrated AI navigation systems that could adapt to changing combat conditions faster than any existing technology. Synthetic manufacturing enhanced by biological self-repair capabilities that would create nearly indestructible infrastructure. Hybrid research programs that could solve problems neither species could address independently. Prime Logic $7.72 projection flickered through calculation patterns that suggested intensive processing. Theoretical cooperation models indicate resource efficiency increases of 234% over competitive acquisition strategies. However, trust protocols for biological cooperation are not present in synthetic programming, which is why we're here. Admiral Chen said, Terran Federation specializes in facilitating cooperation between incompatible species. We've spent 40 years learning how to translate between different forms of intelligence and communication. She gestured to displays showing human diplomatic history, including successful negotiations between species that had considered each other's existence fundamentally incompatible. Cases where biological and artificial intelligences had learned to work together, territorial disputes that had been resolved through creative resource sharing, and conflicts that had been transformed into cooperative partnerships. The key, Admiral Chen continued, is understanding that cooperation doesn't require similarity, it requires complementary capabilities and mutual benefit. What followed was the most sophisticated diplomatic process I had ever witnessed. Admiral Chen didn't just facilitate communication between the Krillian and synthetic representatives. She translated their fundamental assumptions, psychological patterns, and strategic objectives into frameworks that each side could understand and evaluate. For Gorthak, she presented cooperation as a form of strategic conquest that achieved dominance through alliance rather than destruction. For Prime Logic 7742, she demonstrated mathematical proofs that cooperative resource development was more efficient than competitive acquisition. But the breakthrough came when she addressed the core incompatibility that had made cooperation impossible. War Alpha, she said, Krillians value strength, dominance, and the preservation of biological purity. Prime Logic Synthetics value efficiency, logical development, and optimal resource utilization. They're complementary approaches to achieving security and growth. The holographic displays shifted to show hybrid scenarios where Krillian biological superiority and synthetic computational efficiency enhanced each other rather than competing. Bioships with AI enhancement that maintained organic authenticity while gaining computational advantages. Synthetic manufacturing that incorporated biological adaptation without compromising logical efficiency. We're not asking either side to abandon their fundamental nature, Admiral Chen continued. We're showing you how to use your differences as strategic advantages. The negotiation continued for 7 hours, during which I watched something unprecedented happen. Two species that had spent years trying to exterminate each other began developing frameworks for cooperation that enhanced rather than compromised their individual strengths. Territorial agreements that gave each side the types of worlds they preferred while establishing shared development zones for resources that required both biological and synthetic processing. Technology exchange programs that allowed each species to enhance their capabilities without compromising their fundamental nature. Strategic partnership protocols that made both civilizations stronger while maintaining their individual identities. When War Alpha Gorthak and Prime Logic 7742 finally agreed to preliminary cooperation accords, the chamber's environmental systems registered harmonic resonances that suggested the station itself was responding to the emotional significance of the moment. Observer Zethkar, Admiral Chen said, turning to where Tamora and I had been documenting everything. For your analysis records, please note that we have just witnessed the first successful negotiation between previously incompatible galactic civilizations in recorded history. I looked at Tamora, whose bioluminescence was cycling through patterns of pure amazement, then at the displays showing cooperation agreements that redefined what was possible in interspecies relations. Admiral Chen, I said, what happens next? Next, she replied with the confidence of someone who had been planning this moment for decades. We demonstrate to the rest of the galaxy that cooperation is more profitable than conquest, more efficient than competition, and more powerful than any individual civilization could be alone. She paused, looking at holographic displays showing human fleets positioned throughout multiple sectors, all of them apparently conducting similar negotiations with other conflicts. This was just the beginning, observer. We're about to show the galaxy what peace looks like when it's more attractive than war. And as I watched representatives from two of the galaxy's most powerful military forces beginning to plan cooperative ventures instead of mutual destruction, I realized that everything we thought we knew about galactic civilization was about to change forever. 6 months later, I stood on the observation deck of what had once been our small monitoring station, looking out at something that challenged every assumption I had ever held about galactic civilization: the Kepler 442 system had been transformed into the largest diplomatic and trade hub in known space, with vessels from over 40 species arriving daily to participate in what the humans had designated the Cooperative Development Initiative. The station itself had grown into a massive complex that defied conventional architecture. Krillian bioengineering had created living corridors that adapted to the needs of different species, while synthetic computational systems managed resource allocation and traffic control with impossible efficiency. Human engineering principles somehow made it all work together, creating a facility that was simultaneously organic, artificial, and something entirely new. Observer Timora said, her crystalline chimes carrying harmonics I had never heard before. The latest reports from the outer sectors are unprecedented. She gestured to holographic displays showing data streams from across the galaxy. The Krillian synthetic conflict that had dominated 3 sectors for years had ended not in victory or defeat, but in transformation. Joint biosynthetic fleets were now operating as exploration and development forces, establishing colonies that incorporated the best capabilities of both civilizations. But that was just the beginning. The human intervention in the Kepler-Ken 442 system had triggered what their diplomatic corps called cascade cooperation events throughout the galaxy. Species that had been locked in territorial disputes for centuries were suddenly discovering that human-mediated negotiations could transform enemies into partners. Military conflicts that had consumed entire sectors were being resolved through resource-sharing agreements that benefited all parties. The Zephyrian Energy Collective has established joint research programs with the Crystalline Hive, Timora continued, displaying data that would have been impossible 6 months ago. The Void Seekers have agreed to territorial cooperation accords with 17 species they were previously trying to consume. I studied the information streaming across our displays, trying to process implications that redefined everything we thought we knew about interspecies relations. The humans hadn't just stopped individual conflicts, they had somehow convinced dozens of civilizations to abandon the competitive warfare model that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. How did they do it? I wondered aloud, though I had been asking myself the same question for months. The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Chen's voice emerged from our communication systems, though, according to our sensors, no human vessels were in the immediate area. Observer Zethkar, may I join you on your station? I believe it's time you understood what you've been witnessing. 5 minutes later, Admiral Chen materialized on our observation deck through what appeared to be some form of quantum transportation technology that our sensors couldn't identify. She looked exactly as she had during the negotiations 6 months ago, though something in her demeanor suggested that the intervening time had been spent accomplishing things of enormous significance. Admiral, I said, our analysis indicates that human intervention has transformed galactic civilization in ways that should have taken centuries to develop. How was this possible? She moved to the observation windows, looking out at the massive diplomatic complex that surrounded our original station. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had been planning something enormous for a very long time. Zethkar Timora, what I'm about to tell you will require updating your understanding of human history and capabilities. Are you prepared for information that might change your perspective on everything you've observed? Timora's bioluminescence flickered through patterns of curiosity and apprehension.
Admiral, we've been documenting unprecedented events for months.
We're prepared for additional revelations. Admiral Chen gestured to the space around us, and suddenly the observation deck was filled with holographic displays showing data that made our most sophisticated analysis systems seem primitive by comparison. Star charts that covered the entire galaxy, marked with indicators showing human activities across hundreds of sectors, timeline projections that went back decades, revealing preparation and planning that had been in motion long before anyone realized humans existed as a galactic force. The Terran Federation didn't just achieve interstellar capability 40 years ago, she began. We achieved it 90 to 3 years ago, but we spent the first 50 years doing something that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted. The displays shifted to show human vessels, but not the jury-rigged industrial ships that had first appeared in our sensors. These were sleek, advanced vessels that incorporated technologies from dozens of civilizations, moving through star systems with stealth capabilities that made them invisible to every known detection method. Admiral Chen continued. Not just their technologies or military capabilities, but their psychology, their social structures, their fundamental assumptions about how the universe works. We learned their languages, their cultural patterns, their decision-making processes. You've been spying on galactic civilization for 50 years? I asked, feeling scales shift colors with implications I was only beginning to understand. Not spying, Admiral Chen corrected. Learning. There's a significant difference. We never interfered, never influenced events, never took anything that wasn't freely shared. We simply observed, analyzed, and prepared. The holographic displays showed the scope of human observation activities. Monitoring posts in every major sector, analysis teams studying the behavioral patterns of hundreds of species, and research programs that had apparently decoded the fundamental principles governing interspecies conflict and cooperation. Every war we observed, every failed negotiation, every territorial dispute that ended in mutual destruction taught us something about what didn't work, Admiral Chen explained. But more importantly, we began to identify patterns that could work if someone had the knowledge and capability to implement them correctly. Femora's crystalline chimes carried tones of amazement and something approaching awe. You prepared for 50 years to intervene in galactic conflicts? We prepared for 50 years to end galactic conflicts, Admiral Chen replied. The competitive warfare model that has dominated this galaxy for millennia is fundamentally unsustainable. Resources are consumed in military expenditures that produce no long-term value. Entire civilizations are destroyed over territorial disputes that could be resolved through cooperation. The overall result is slower technological development, reduced resource efficiency, and constant threat of catastrophic wars that could destabilize entire sectors. She gestured to new displays showing economic models that painted the current transformation in stark mathematical terms. Resource efficiency gains from cooperative development programs, technological advancement rates from interspecies research partnerships, and strategic stability indices that had improved by orders of magnitude over the past 6 months. Admiral, I said, even with 50 years of preparation, how did you convince dozens of civilizations to abandon behavioral patterns that had been successful for centuries? By demonstrating that those patterns were only successful in a limited context. Every species in this galaxy developed their strategic approaches based on competition with opponents who shared similar technological and psychological limitations. But what happens when you encounter opponents who understand your psychology better than you do and can counter your technology with hybrid systems you've never imagined? The displays shifted to show tactical analyses from the various human interventions. Each engagement demonstrated the same basic pattern: human forces making conventional warfare obsolete through superior intelligence, hybrid technology, and strategic approaches that transcended traditional limitations. We didn't defeat any of these civilizations through superior firepower, Admiral Chen continued. We defeated them by making victory through violence impossible, then offering alternatives that were more attractive than continued warfare. But how did you develop the technology to interface with bioships, enhance synthetic computation, and integrate systems that should be completely incompatible? Tamora asked, her patterns flickering with scientific curiosity. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked like someone who was about to reveal the most significant secret of all. Because we didn't just study other species' technologies, Tamora, we studied their fundamental approaches to problem-solving. Kryllian biological adaptation, synthetic computational analysis, crystalline energy manipulation, quantum field engineering from the Void Seekers. We learned the underlying principles that made each approach successful, then developed ways to combine them. The holographic displays around us began showing something that redefined my understanding of what technology could be. Human research facilities where bioships were being grown with integrated AI systems, manufacturing centers where synthetic precision was being enhanced with biological self-repair capabilities, energy manipulation systems that combined crystalline focusing with quantum field control,